This is China, the world's most populous country and second largest economy. This is a country that has experienced the most rapid economic growth and development in history. Welcome to the Financial Flow. Please like and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up on our latest videos. As the country opened to foreign trade and embraced the free market, it evolved from a famine-ravaged backwater to the superpower that is today. This sustained development has done some amazing things, both within the country and around the world. Behind the futuristic facade of glass-clad skyscrapers and mega projects, China's government is unfortunately reverting to an increasingly authoritarian rule. Until now, many of these issues have been conveniently overlooked, both by citizens of the country and by the countries and businesses that were benefiting from this new cheap pool of labor. But this is starting to change. Increasingly hostile relations between China and its trading partners have meant that a lot of these institutions and governments that were once happy are starting to change. Today, the country has experienced strong and consistent growth. A population that is constantly growing will see their quality of life improve, year after year. Is China's period of rapid growth coming to an end? What is causing this lull? Is this really a bad thing? After all, most advanced economies tend to have much more modest growth rates. Let's look at perhaps the most pressing issue in the nation now. The Chinese real estate market is a multi-trillion-dollar time bomb that is even more imagined in the economic systems than real estate markets in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. There are three major reasons for this insane pricing. The first is obviously the expectation of future growth. This is a major factor in determining the market demand for anything, but especially things that are considered assets. Now, none of these issues are a major impediment to China's future gains. Why? Because real estate is viewed as a speculative asset first and a place to live second. Building standards in China are deplorable, but most people don't care. Why? Because no matter how bad the underlying structure is, it will almost certainly be worth more tomorrow than it is today. China's enthusiasm for real estate is so strong that some provincial governments have tried to cool demand by limiting the amount of real estate a single household can own. China's economic growth has been spectacular, and the best way for people to pay for it is to invest in real estate. If China's economy continues to double in size every 8 years, paying 5% of GDP, million RMB for an apartment or house will appear to be a wise investment. In many ways, this is like the tech companies in the United States, which may have poor underlying fundamentals but have seen a long period of sustained growth based on projections of future growth, which is further fueling price growth. In the same way that investors in the West have accepted that some stocks are worth 100 times what the company makes in a year, residents in China have come to accept that homes can cost up to 46 times what the average worker earns in a year. Will these markets endure? So far, no one has become wealthy by betting against them, so only time will tell. This comparison also nicely leads us to the next reason why housing in China is so expensive. People don't really have anywhere else to invest. The basic rundown is that average Chinese people just don't invest into Chinese companies because they have historically not been great investments, especially when compared to the overall growth of the economy. There have also been significant issues with things like peer-to-peer lending schemes in China, which were very popular until the government cracked down on the practice entirely due to fraud. Basically, if you want to put your money to work in China, it needs to be in real estate. For what it's worth, the government has tried to control this rampant speculation, but so far it's not that effective. These other two factors may pale in comparison to the third driver of China's insane house prices, which is societal pressure to own a home. In the US, everyone from prominent financial advisors will talk endlessly about the need to buy a house. Given the one-child policy causing an imbalance of men and women in the nation, a lot of Chinese gentlemen have found it almost impossible to get married without owning a house. Beyond that, there are very real structural advantages of owning a home. The Chinese population is heavily restricted by what is known as the hukou system, which basically tracks household registration. This system tracks where people's primary residence is, and from that decides where they will have access to public services, like healthcare and education for their children. The internal migrant population within China is huge. A lot of rural residents leave their small villages to move to city centers where they can attract significantly higher wages. The problem is that these migrant workers will still be considered residents of their small village, which means that they will be denied access to even the most basic public services in the cities where they live and work because of the hukou system. On an individual level, the solution is to buy a house. It may be extremely expensive, but if you share a room with 12 colleagues and save everything you earn while getting a loan from friends, family, and a bank, you might be able to afford small one-bedroom apartment. It may not be ideal, but once you have the deed to that household, you are in, and you're no longer a second-rate citizen in the city that you call home. This is a problem at the best of times, but what happens when all of these hopeful workers are suddenly forced into lockdown with no government assistance? It gets messy real fast, and just how messy will we soon see. But before we go any further, why don't they just abolish the system? Chinese government is obviously trying to cool down this real estate bubble. They have introduced laws such as high deposit requirements for second and third properties. They have recently proposed a nationwide property tax, and in many instances, they have put a hard cap on how many pieces of real estate people can own. Problem is, none of these efforts have really worked. In fact, in the case of provinces that have limited home ownership, it's almost had the opposite effect. But there is still an obvious solution. Just get rid of this hukou system. The problem is that it isn't one universal system. It includes dozens of individual systems specific to different provinces and cities around the country. Getting rid of this system would require the cooperation of all these individual provinces, who may not be too keen on the idea at all. You never actually own land in China. You're rented off the government for a set period. Typically, these land rentals are given to developers who then build large apartment buildings on them and sell the individual units for a healthy profit. Historically, it has been provincial governments collecting the revenue from the sale of these land parcels. Wealthier areas have more expensive and desirable real estate, and therefore attract higher prices for their land rights. Beyond this building is a huge industry that supports millions of workers in China, and the area with the most development attracts the most jobs, which in turn attracts further development. But despite this, the national government has recently announced that all this land rights revenue will now be collected centrally. This is a huge deal because government revenue from these land rights sales makes up a very significant portion of total government revenue. Many see this as a first step toward instituting a uniform land tax, which would simultaneously increase government revenue while decreasing demand for real estate assets, which would now be an ongoing expense. The coronavirus aftermath has not been easy on China, and while other officially reported infection figures are quite low, this does not mean that the country has escaped unscathed. On the surface, it doesn't seem that way. Exports are at their highest level in history after suffering an understandable dip during early 2020. But the thing is, these impressive export figures are mainly due to the price growth of commodities rather than the genuine growth in productive potential. Port and factory closures across the nation have slowed down the workshop of world, and heightened trade tensions have certainly not helped the situation. Unemployment is high, especially amongst young workers, even by the very creative reporting standards of the government. And what work does exist is becoming harder and less rewarding. When everything is on the up and up, and people are happy to work a few extra hours because it means they make more money and improve their quality of life. But for this first time in a long time, young workers are starting to see that this additional effort is going more to support an aging and over-leveraged society than them. A new phenomenon known as lying flat is sweeping the nation. It is a type of peaceful protest in which mostly young people refuse to work in high-intensity roles or refuse to work at all, preferring to lie flats. It's one that the government appears to be very concerned about. China's economy is still heavily reliant on hardworking cheap labor. Without it, the domestic market that has been worked so hard to cultivate will collapse very quickly, if not already. Now, debt-fueled growth isn't always a bad thing. Debt collectors have seen a massive increase in the past few months, and all the factors that we have seen might be starting to sway this tower of cards. Historically, This is where the government would step in. But this real estate bubble might genuinely be too big to manage. An authoritarian government that still purports to being communist, being the dominant economic superpower in the world, is not what I'm expecting. Regardless of when economy slows down, it's more of a question of what happens next. When there is an economic meltdown in modern advanced democracies, people lose their jobs, their homes, and their cars, and it's truly terrible. But we tend to flip the script and vote for the other mobile politician who swears they would have handled it much better if they were in charge. Even if a minor hiccup in China's promise of endless growth occurs, people will quickly become aware of all other issues that they were willing to overlook while things were going well. Thanks for watching! Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Have a good one.